Kingdom Celebration is back, and maybe unsurprising to some, the first event after the discounts, a new Dragon Skill was added in, and from my testing, which I will go into here, I show it in reports and whatnot, I think it's probably a top 3 skill in the game, alongside Reinforcement and Reroute, but we will get into that. So it's the normal cost, only 300. The Kingdom Celebration event in itself seems to be tweaked slightly, and it's only lasting 3 days, so all of this unlocked immediately. I'm not sure if this is going to be a permanent change, but it is quite relevant because it makes getting skills a lot harder, because the packs for them reset daily, and of course now you're going to have less days to buy these packs in, and all the stages and whatnot are totally unchanged. So that's potentially frustrating to some and something to be aware of. But the focus of this video is obviously going to be about this skill. So as a rough overview of the skill, the way you want to envision it basically is every 10% of your total troops that you lose, a buff will be applied onto all your troops participating in the fight, increasing their damage by a certain percentage, depending on the level of the skill, obviously. And this will stack throughout the fight as you lose more and more troops. So what this will do in practice is it should level out your damage output a bit, where, say you have it at level 9, you get hit by a female player with a really strong Salma Layla proc at 1 second, and it instantly knocks you down to, say, 85% health, and then at 11 seconds again you get knocked down to 70%, and you're really at a numbers deficit in that fight. And previously that numbers advantage for your opponent there could just snowball that fight in that favor, where they have so many more numbers it just becomes a bit overwhelming for you. Now in that situation, if you had this skill at level 9, your damage output when you hit 70% troops would be increased by 15%, and that would sort of bridge the gap from your overall damage output to what you would have had with 100% of your troops remaining. So it's an anti-snowball skill. I mean, overall it's just a damage increase skill, but because it's anti-snowball in nature, it is a bit of a counter in terms of the meta to female, and naturally it will be better for bleed and weakness also, because their damage is a bit more backloaded in the fight than females is, so they'll be doing more damage later in the fight when they'll normally be having fewer troops. And we are of course going into a AC season in a few weeks, and potentially this may have some meta changing influences because of that, because Cav female will be hit a bit in terms of its effectiveness because of this. As far as the skill goes, I have here all the levels of it mapped out. So mine is level 7 currently, and that's what I'm going to use in the reports I show. It scales from 0.5% up to 5% at level 9. The 10% troop loss doesn't change. The rally stacking limit doesn't change at all either. So you'll need 3 copies of this at level 9 to cap the skill, which is actually quite a lot compared to other things. Like Reroute only requires 1.5, and when it's capped in rallies, that effect will be very, very strong, with it giving 15% as a flat damage increase per 10% lost troops. I also have the strategic skills listed here, and at level 9 you can see here, when a dragon with a skill is deployed and a troop takes skill damage, there is a 30% chance to increase total attack by 800% for 5 seconds. This effect can be stacked. That's actually a very good strategic skill, I think, particularly if you're being clipped by AoE damage. Like on the Vanguard all-out war map, at least, there is just so many Daenerys's running around. If you're constantly getting clipped by AoE damage like that, and this stacks, like it says there, you can really scale up your attack and deal significantly more damage through that. So it's quite a good strategic skill as well, and in my opinion, a very good, just normal PvP skill. So this is how it will appear in reports when you lose 10% troops. When the skill effect of Dragon Enraged triggers, all ally lineups all columns, damage is increased by the number, of course, that your damage modifier is according to the level. So this would be 5% at level 9. And this does appear to be a flat damage increase, and as far as I can tell, I think it affects all instances of damage. So here is normal attacks. As I say here, despite gradually fewer attacking troops, the damage increases. So this first attack is with just a 3% buff applied, got 87k inf, and it does 1050 damage. Then the next attack with just one additional buff of this, and about 2,300 less troops, it actually does 29 more damage, despite the fewer troops because of this buff. And that trend will be consistent throughout. There's a bit of a jump here, because there's Patello's buff that comes into play. But even comparing past that, you can see it goes from 1,329 defeated troops to 1,369, so that's 40 more kills. And you'll note here that the allied number of infantry stays the exact same between these two comparisons. So the only difference is one additional instance of this Dragon Enraged buff. And of course, this is going to be affecting all 5 lineups. So this is just for comparison's sake, but the amount of damage you're going to be getting from this. So this is with a bleed setup too, so all the Sonara procs, the bleeds, the 5 lineups normal attacking. I don't think any dragon skill is going to be providing more damage than this in the entire game. So maybe that's a bit early and a bit premature to say, but I don't see what would be providing more damage, because this is only at level 7 as well. This buff can be almost doubled, and it's very, very significant even at 7. Again, in the same report, you can see, finally, one more instance of the buff. There's almost 3,000 less troops, but again, it does 27 more damage there. So for normal attacks, for bleed, it is exceptional. I think every bleed player, realistically, this should probably be maybe your main priority after reinforcement, if not your main priority above reinforcement. Reinforcement has so many ulterior uses where it has no rally stacking limit. It's so good for loss prevention, I'd probably still prioritize reinforcement. But this is so good for damage output, particularly with how easily reroute caps and rallies too. I might honestly start advising people to prioritize this for bleed over reroute as the second best skill. Looking down just a bit, a question I had was, would it affect commander damage? Because things like this normally don't. It's normally just the normal attacks. When I actually looked in reports, you see these two were a 1-second Salma procs with 0-star Salma weapon, so that's guaranteed to hit and 100% damage coefficient, and that did 2,350 damage. When you then scroll down the report to 11 seconds, notice that the attacking troops have been reduced slightly, so from 172,000 there to 166,000 here. Even still, with fewer troops totaling into this commander damage, these commander actives have still done 145 more damage, and it's consistent for both, so there were no variables other than one instance of this 3% buff. The numbers didn't totally line up when I multiplied this by 1.03, but it was still the only variable, and I tested it 3-4 times, and every single time the second castings of actives, despite fewer troops, every single time did more damage than this first set. So I might be wrong, but as far as I can tell in reports, it does appear to increase commander damage also. I think it affects weakness attack damage too. That was so hard to find report examples of though, because obviously between attacks, the weakness modifier is also increasing, so you can't sort of isolate the variables. But anecdotally, from the small bits I could see, there did seem to be a slightly higher spike with attacks immediately after the 3% buff was applied compared to without though. If anyone has any hard-based evidence showing whether this does or doesn't work, I would be interested in seeing that. But as far as I can tell from everything I've tested, it affects normal attacks, which means it affects bleeds and crits too. It affects commander damage, so it will still be good for female. And as far as I can tell, it affects weakness attacks too. So all in all, there's just not really a downside to this as far as I can see. It's such a good skill. I mean, unsurprisingly, there is power creep with the newer skills being better, but some of the more recent releases haven't been that great. So for example, like Bleed Weakness, those ones were fairly meh, but this is really, really good. I don't think it's a coincidence it's releasing right before AC Season 2, because I would imagine people will likely want to be rushing this at this point, considering how good it seems to be before that season actually starts up. So yeah, if you can afford it, obviously most people are totally drained of fragments since it's directly after that discount event, and that will not be a coincidence, but if you can afford it, go get the skill. I'm pretty sure there's no build in the game where this skill doesn't belong on the best dragon skill setup for that synergy type.